Welcome back to Night Flight. Today we are going to continue our conversation with Troy McLachlan. He is the author of The Saturn Death Cult. SaturnDeathCult.com is his website. And today, in the first part, we will have a look at what is going on in our world. And then in the second part, we will go deeper into the Silver Age, the priesthoods, the nobility, and everything that is connected to that. So, Troy, welcome back.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be back, especially during these really interesting times, given the topics that we often cover. It's almost like we're becoming commentators rather than discussionists on actual real events. See where it all goes.
Yeah. So I would like to have a look at the UK, where you are now. Okay, now you have another new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Another day, another Prime Minister, yeah.
And just recently, I read a comment by somebody, and the comment was, my son has witnessed 2 monarchs and 3 prime ministers. He is 4 months old.
Yeah, it's quite unbelievable. Yeah, I grew up in what was the old, what was the old British Empire, became the Commonwealth. I grew up in New Zealand. I was born in South Africa. These were all parts of the British Empire. And now I'm living in the UK. I've lived in Hong Kong for a lot of the time, which was also part of the British Empire. And it's almost, it's weird. Every minute of that time up until the death of Queen Elizabeth was with her in power. It was like, it was just a constant throughout. So I'd always been very dubious about the accession of Charles as king. He's definitely a very much confirmed globalist. It's basically the influence of his father with the Bilderberger group, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and so on. I always felt that the Queen, for all her faults, was at least a bulwark against Charles coming to power. I'm not, people by who they keep their company with, and Charles keeps some very dodgy company, and his father extremely dodgy company. So. Yes, that's it's just weird to see what it's even the way the money is going to change. In New Zealand, in Hong Kong, when I first arrived and so on, there was a reference to the Queen, being on the money. That's all going to change over time. And it's just little things like that that really jolt you out, that we're now talking about real change in the world, wherever it might lead, as opposed to theoretical what could happen. It's now happening.
So do you really think they will replace Charles on that money? Because the United States has a lot of dead people on there.
Yes, Charles will definitely feature on the coinage of the realm. As part of it, they've got a system here when public buildings get made. There's a stamp, a cornerstone. It's not a cornerstone, it's a laid stone that tells you who was the reigning monarch at the time. So that's all going to be CR3 from now on. It's been ER2, Elizabeth reigning second, and such. So these are the things that when I've been out and about, just doing shopping and so on, these are the things that have jolted people more than all the pageantry that sort of happened. This country is actually, with all the weddings at stages and all its, games and football and so on like that, and things to do with the royal family, it's quite used to pageantry. But it's these sorts of changes that. To the money supply, to the way things are gazetted in buildings, all of these sorts of things, even down to the singing of the national anthem. I think we're the only country in the world where the national anthem changes depending on the gender of the monarch. So,
yeah. In terms of real power, how much influence does the monarch have?
The monarch has extraordinary powers that never get used unless somebody tells them to use it. Now, I say that because it's always been my bugbear when people talk about when the Queen was a part of the was with us running the show. People often refer to her as she's nothing more than a figurehead, at the best a rubber stamp. And just for people who don't sort of understand, and most Brits don't actually understand, most people in the Commonwealth don't understand the actual power the Queen has and what her role is supposed to be in a constitutional monarchy. Both Australia and New Zealand and Canada, she is actually still the sovereign head of those nations. She's the Queen of New Zealand, well, was, he's now the King of New Zealand and so on. And the role that the Queen has always played is that after Parliament under Oliver Cromwell basically put paid to the idea that kings and queens could rule by divine decree, it pleases us to do it, therefore it shall be done. And to this date, it's the only nation, this is the English, not the British, but the English, that smaller part of the UK, is still the only nation to actually cut off, depose a sovereign head where the deposing of that sovereign head was an act of law, not a full-blown revolution. If Cromwell had taken the crown and stuck it on his own head, then it would be no different to anywhere else. You got a new guy in charge. That's how it would have worked. But Charles was executed because he broke the law, and nobody is above the law in a rule of law place. So it was the first time and one of the only times in history, if I can't think of any other, where the actual sovereign head was brought to book by the laws that covered everybody. And it was emphasized, you are not above the law. In fact, you are the person most subject to the law. And you have been conspiring with the Catholic Church to put Britain back under Catholicism and so on. That's treason. You're going to die. The royal family don't like people knowing that. Once you had the restoration of Charles II and so on, they went out of their way to turn Oliver Cromwell into a pariah of British history and so on. But no monarch has ever attempted to go so far as to say, right, I'm ruling by decree. And what came as a result of that revolution is that the monarch of of England and later on the UK, their role in government is to make sure that now that Parliament doesn't go the same way as the kings went, i.e. start ruling by decree, start ruling by whatever they see fit, in terms of that. And so the classic example that is given is that the monarch's role, and this is the example I know, it impinges on your own country's history. But the idea is that under the monarch's role, you could never get a system of laws where a minority of people are attacked because a majority in Parliament decides that they're going to get rid of people, like happened in Nazi Germany at the time. The idea is for the king to always say, well, that law you've passed can actually apply to me. And so you get the idea, first they came for the handicapped, then for the homosexuals, then for the Jews, then for anybody who wasn't a National Socialist in the German experience. The idea is that the Queen or the King is supposed to look at that and say, well, they can come for me on that law. And so you have this extraordinary power that they can veto, like an American president can veto any law passed by Congress and the Senate that is less than 2/3. So the Queen can actually veto, or the King, I still refer to the Queen. So the monarch can still veto any law where that sort of hey, we've just made a law, everybody's for it, we're going to go after the Jews, or we're going to go after the, we're going to go after the Buddhists, or whoever it is that you want to target. The Queen can veto that on the basis of the monarch can veto that on the basis of how it applies to them. So that's their role, and it's become a rubber stamp. All right, because they're so fearful. The role has reversed from the monarchy to the Parliament, where Parliament is now what the monarchy was from Henry VIII up to the English Revolution, and sort of rides roughshod over the Queen, and basically says, "Here's something, put your rubber stamp on it, be a good person, and get that done." However, coming from down under Australia and New Zealand, where you see the power of the British monarch is what happened in Australia under the leadership, under the prime ministership of a guy called Gough Whitlam. And he was voted in democratically by the will of the people in Australia. And for whatever reasons, people say this and that and so on. The fact of the matter is that the Queen was able to sack him. All right, he wasn't voted out. She was able to say, okay, I effectively, through her Governor General at that time, I'm told he's no good for the country, so he has to go. Boom. All right.
Wow, just like that.
Just like that. And everybody, as I say, that the power of the monarch is in that one act. It is still there. But it's whoever controls the monarchy. It's not the monarch themselves. They're far too worried. And I will say that my belief is that the royal family were completely crippled in the 20th century from exercising, because these are powers that they could have used for good. Yeah. All right. There are things that they could have looked at and said, no, you can't do that. South African apartheid is a classic example, where they could have stepped in and stopped the institution of that at that time. There are other examples there that one can point to, and particularly in what we're seeing today, the behavior of the Canadian Prime Minister and his party during the pandemic, the truckers, protests and so on. They've run completely amok, and the sovereign has the ability to stand up to that. But in 1917, their cousins, the Tsar and his family in Russia, were deposed and then later on executed brutally in a basement in Yekaterinburg. And I think the royal family and the way they treated the British aristocracy and the royal family treated their Russian cousins who were escaping communist Russia at the time, what were called the White Russians, who were they just didn't want to have anything to do with it, because they didn't want to piss off the Communist International movement and potentially create a situation where the British monarchy could go the same way as the Russian monarchy. The Kaiser of Germany himself had actually, because of the way the First World War had ended, he was deposed, and the Weimar Republic was born, and so on in Germany. And we look back on the First World War, we have to remember that when it started, they didn't go, hey, it's the First World War. They called it the War of the Cousins, because the Tsar and the Kaiser went at it with each other, and then Britain joined in on the side of the Russians, ostensibly the Belgians and so on. And George V of England, the Kaiser Wilhelm, and Tsar Nicholas, these guys were cousins. In fact, you can see the family resemblance. There are photos there. And as a result of that destruction of the Tsars in a particularly brutal way, I think the royal family of Great Britain, the British royal family, kind of got the message and played it low, decided not to exercise any power, stay out of politics, that sort of thing. And as a result, they've let some things slide that could have been handled better with the powers they had. The only time it was ever used was against Gough Whitlam in Australia. So they've always had it, but they didn't use it. So I think the Queen acted like any mother. She didn't want to see her family done in like Tsar Nicholas had seen his family and how he'd been done in. That kind of savagery that was, visited on that family. And the Duke of Edinburgh of the Battenberg line. There's a hell of a story there as well in terms of Mountbatten and what was happening there within the British royal family that plays into it. But they were all very concerned, I feel, that there was always that physical threat of a revolution, considering that Great Britain, being at the head of the Industrial Revolution, was always identified in Marxist thinking as being the place the revolution should first have happened, the most industrialized nation being the first place that the workers would revolt. Why Russia became the first successful communist revolution is very strange, because it was an agrarian-based society. They hardly had industry to speak of in Russia. But there's all sorts of reasons for that. So one thing that I actually got an A+ for was arguing why, that it was an outside influence that brought the revolution in Russia, not an inside. And it all plays into very much what in my book I dubbed the Saturn death cult and the banking system that is controlled by that system. But that's my take on the royal family, that they've been very much cowed. And the Queen played that very softly thing. I think she had her bags packed to go at a moment's notice at any time, if she ever thought that was going to happen. I mean, Queen Victoria, I think there were 3 assassination attempts on her. There wasn't an assassination attempt on Queen Elizabeth that we know of. I believe that there was at least 2 coup attempts. That's my own personal opinion. And that these coup attempts happened very close to home. But that's speculation.
Yeah, okay. So with Rishi Sunak, a lot of people are, you have all these headlines. Yeah, but he's so extremely rich. UK has the first person of color as a prime minister. Honestly, to me, none of that really matters.
No.
What matters to me, for instance, is his connection and his closeness to the WEF.
Like I was saying with
and
Charles.
I think he is exactly the guy that they wanted on that position.
It comes down, like with Charles was saying, it's the company they keep. Look at who Rishi Sunak spends his time with, who he's, his career has been connected to, and so on like that. It amounts to a globalist coup. Italy's gone through it. They've had an appointed prime minister for I don't know how long, until the recent one that's just come along that's sort of bucked the trend. But Great Britain, definitely, we have a out and out puppet of what's his name, the WEF, World Economic Forum guy, Schwab. Yeah, I would say Sunak is very much in his pocket.
Yeah, exactly. And we also have Mr. Tobias Elwood, who tweeted then, the free market experiment is over, the reset begins. So, what type of reset is he talking about here? And do we even have free markets? I don't think so.
We've never had a free market. Any country loses its free market whenever it adopts a central banking system. The great capture, of course, 1913, when the United States was put under a central banking model. Europe had it, and they went one bigger when they put the whole of Europe under the European, central bank and such. No, you don't have a free market when the power to coin money is in the hands of a private corporation that nobody has any transparency to look into. as such, and that is very much where we are in the world. And this is something that I often say: it's not as if they haven't told us what the Great Reset means. Now they've written books on it. They produced books on, they've been so outrageous as to actually even say, hey, the COVID thing is a great opportunity to reset. Could they be more obvious? No, they couldn't. I think that's what's so interesting about the world we're living in, and what's happening with the internet and with the machinations in the United States, and with what Putin is doing, and all these dynamics that have gone crazy. It's taken a lot of their long-term planning, and they've had to accelerate, and they're now no longer worried about trying to ease it in behind the scenes. That's always been the playbook of the powers that be, is that the people you see in office really mean nothing in terms of what's actually happening behind the scenes. And it's the people behind the scenes who, various organizations that one can point to, who have dictated where we've gone along. Now, they've always favored easing things in. They'll put tribal balloons up for one idea, that whole, create a conflict, create a solution, get the change that you want. Hegelian dialectic at its best. And it's a little bit like they've got the speed wobbles, and things are happening. I think I've said to you quite a number of times, Judith, that I believe that at this point they fully expected to have had a limited nuclear exchange in the world that would have shocked the world so much that it would have been the great excuse for why they were bringing in COVID restrictions, disease health restrictions, financial restrictions. Everything that is controlled from a central basis would be instituted under the guise of a shell-shocked population that has seen a limited nuclear exchange. I even believe that the nuclear exchange was simply meant to give the illusion of a war. But the Trump epoch, for what anybody ever thinks about, if you follow your left versus right paradigms and things like that, it seems that he has he's basically thrown a spanner in their their timeline. And when things get out of sync in terms of timelines, you start to get the kind of chaos that we're witnessing in the world today that looks totally like confusion. It's nothing but confusion at the moment.
So in your assessment, Rishi Sunak is fully on board with the Great Reset, and that
100%. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As defined by the World Economic Forum. And so is King Charles. King Charles made a speech that the COVID and the COVID pandemic was a great opportunity to reset things. King Charles's father, the late Duke of Edinburgh, was great mates with the late Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, one of the founding members of the Bilderberger group, and so on. Now, I've never been able to actually chase down who actually said it, but it was one of those two who said, if I had the choice of what I could come back as,
Prince Philip.
It was Prince Philip, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to come back as a virus to basically get rid of, to get rid of humanity. And these are the people who are pontificating to us about the great values of preserving the world and what we have in the planet and so on like that. But they have this murderous Malthusian bent that the useless eaters have to go. This is the legacy that King Charles comes to the throne with in Great Britain, and he has a prime minister who's fully on board with that.
Yeah, and I have to say, when I think back to Prince Bernhard, Yeah, as they say, karma is a bitch. And I
Yes.
remember his last years. I mean, he was almost completely gone. Even when he was joining his wife,
Yeah.
he was suffering from depression. His face was empty.
Yeah.
That there was no life any longer in his eyes. He was just, like, yeah, like a puppet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there was no essence anymore,
Yeah.
at least that I could perceive.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think, yeah, karma comes hard and fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of these people, for them, they have that ultimate pursuit of, we've discussed the whole sort of sacrificial element of what I call Saturn death cult, so culture and so on, the human sacrifice ideas that people talk about being about behind the scenes with these elitists and so on. But it just boils down to trying to position themselves with what they consider to be the force behind the universe, whether it's a god or the demerge of whatever they identify with it. Their only interest is to have influence, so that if they do come back in a reincarnationist way, they come back into those families that are holding sway in the earth. And those families do change subtly down through the ages, because these families within the group don't think of it as a monolithic, hey, we're all together and all these other idiots, we just have a lot of fun ruling over them. These people fight viciously amongst themselves.
Oh yeah.
And I would put Bernhard strongly in what I would call the blue blood Nazi camp. As far as what he was pushing, nobody typified the, a lot of people are shocked when you say that the European Union experiment was born in Nazi Germany. It
It's
was
true.
yeah, and you could say fascist Italy to a certain extent, but the objective of the European Union was precisely what the Nazi Party wanted, with guns and tanks, but failed to do so, but have done very successfully through pure fascism, which is the elevation of the corporate interests as the defining influence in whatever nation state. The nation state is an illusion, and such. This USA, rule Britannia. What's the German equivalent of that? Hals am Rock or something like that.
I don't know. Do we
There's
even have one?
the fatherland, something along those lines, and that
What?
the fatherland, or
Oh yeah, but that is long, long gone.
yeah,
If you say fatherland these days, you have
you'll
to
be
be
frog
careful
marched
that
out.
they
Yeah,
call the police,
yeah. But that those concepts are simply control mechanisms over a greater populace by the people who control the nation states. And as I've often said in interviews, and I sort of allude to in my book, Saturn Death Cult, my first inclination that something wasn't right was when I understood that in the First World War, German bankers, American bankers, British bankers, and even Russian bankers and Italian bankers were all meeting together as buddies during the first global conflict that we had. They would meet in Basel and in Switzerland. And the same thing happened in the Second World War. And that to me told me that there was a guiding hand that had control over the single most important element in any economy, that did not adhere to nationalistic ideas, did not think of themselves in terms of national identities, but were globalist in the elitist sense, that they were a nation. I refer to them as a kingdom of merchants, a hidden kingdom of merchants or merchant bankers. They belong to their own their own stasis within society, and they to them national boundaries are meaningless. The only thing that gives them any pause is language differences. But even that is sort of, gone with technology is now evaporating. But yeah, that guiding hand has always been there behind the scenes. And, when it comes to the Second World War, I would go so far as to say, this might be controversial for people, but Hitler was very much their creature, as much as the Bolsheviks were in Russia. But he did something that just couldn't be allowed to stand. I think they were waiting to, I think they'd always planned 1941-42 as the kickoff between the communists and the Nazis for the World War, not 1939, but they had to bring it up because Hitler started coining his own money. Kind of thing that Gaddafi did, the kind of thing that Saddam Hussein did. Whenever these people during the era of this hidden kingdom of merchant bankers, this international central banking system, whenever people start the process of coining one's own money where it is not a debt, then that has to be stopped, and the full force of whatever military they can manipulate into conflict is unleashed on that situation. So that's a different perspective than the usual, Hitler is straightforward the devil and so on like that. There are these nuances that you have to look at as to, if Hitler was the devil, why didn't they start in 1934, 35?
Yeah, exactly.
And so on. Okay. All right. Why wait as far as he did? Why the appeasement? Why the letting of the arms build up and all this sort of stuff and that happened and such? But as soon as he started coining money, I can't remember what the name of the currency was, but it was it Deutschmarks? I know, but Reichsmarks.
Reichsmark.
That's right. Yes, yeah. As soon as he started doing that, that's when things turned for him, and he was on his own.
Yeah. Would you say that is similar to what Dr. Joseph Farrell calls Nazi International?
Absolutely. Joseph Farrell is the guy, is my go-to guy. Him and a guy called Dave Emery, who's been talking about what he calls the remarkable Borman, what do you call it? The remarkable Borman organization that was the means by which the Nazis looted the wealth out of Germany and Europe to become this extra-national phenomenon that exists in the injected itself into the international banking system and has that power to be a part of the worldwide system through finance, but not need a country necessarily to center itself in. Yes, the Nazi International is a fact. It exists. It's a player, a major player, and Joseph Farrell's work is second to none in explaining how this came about and so on. And you also have to read that very much in context with what I allude to in my book at a very introductory level. But Joseph Farrell's books, the Babylon's Banksters, the Vipers of Venice, and so on like that, show how the system has been with us for 2,500 years, easily in various forms. And it shifted from Babylon to Jerusalem, where it was run out of the temple there during Roman times. From there to Venice, well, a little bit in Rome, but mainly in Venice, where it bled the Roman Empire to death and then launched the Middle Ages under the Catholic Church domination. From Venice, it moved to Amsterdam. From Amsterdam, it moved to where it sits today, which is the City of London, which is like the Vatican. It's an independent thing in the middle of this country. It's incredible. I've gone down and just it beggars belief that the monarch of this country needs permission to enter that square mile because it's an independent thing.
And then it's London,
yes, and then Wall Street and Washington D.C. are parts of that system that has been captured and fully captured in 1913 with the establishment of the Federal Reserve. But the big boy in all of this is still the Bank of England in terms of for the simple reason that if you look very, very closely, most of these international banking multinationals, the ones that really count, the very high up ones with the very common names, the HSBCs, JP Morgan, Chase, Deutsche Bank, in your own country, Credit Suisse, these sorts of companies, they maintain an almost headquartered presence in the city of London, more so than they do in their supposed countries of origin. So the city of London has always been the nucleus by which the debt-based financial system run through central banking has been controlled. And of course, I'm very optimistic that we are seeing the destruction of that system. But Joseph P. Farrell, in his books, plots a very, very succinct lineage from ancient Babylon, which I tie back to the cryptic story of the establishment of a statue that everybody had to bow down to on the plains of Shinar. And he traces it from that period of time all the way up to the up to today's financial system. And the Nazi International are, you could say, in my book, I call it the Nazi conundrum, because it's like they crashed the party. All right. Have you, I don't normally like going to Hollywood or TV and so on like that, but in Germany, you've got a show called, is it Babylon Berlin or Berlin Babylon?
Yeah, but I have never seen an episode.
It's an interesting story. The latest series is very good. I didn't care for much the third series. The first two series were very good, but what it's doing is it's showing it very much looks at the aristocratic the relationship of German aristocracy to the rise of the Nazi Party and the conflict of who is going to really control things. That phenomena that Farrell talks about, which is that a lot of these aristocratic guys thought the Nazis were a means to their end. And what happened was they lost control. They lost, guys like Hitler, and to be perfectly honest, it's guys like Goering and Martin Bormann. They're the ones to look at. They're the ones who had the actual brains. Hitler was the charismatic talisman of the movement, but that story of how the aristocratic billionaire class, the top fascist class, not the Nazis, the fascists, the corporate fascists of Germany, thought they could use Hitler to get their means, and then lost control of him, is very much shown in that story. It's fascinating to watch, because a similar thing has happened in Britain, in terms of how the aristocracy thought that they could control certain elements within the Bank of England and so on like that. But in Germany, it was interesting, because the Nazi development, it's like they gate crashed the party. They created a war. They ransacked Europe to get that wealth that was not theirs, and then they've used that wealth to insinuate themselves into a system that needed that wealth to continue going after the Second World War. So it's a union, or they're odd bedfellows. They hate each other and so on, but they need each other. And Farrell has always claimed that the difference with the Nazis compared to the Masons, compared to other groups that have insinuated themselves, you can go back into history, the Templars, people like that, okay? The difference with the Nazis is that when they say that they are going to enact violence, they mean it. They have the capacity to do this kind of thing, whereas in the past, people who lose financial clout are not able to, they're cast into the dustbin of history. You see that, for instance, with the Catholic Church. Their financial clout is, just 100 years ago, it was all over for the Catholic Church, other than its control at a religious level. It didn't have the financial wherefore. The Nazis, and through groups like P2 in Italy and so on like that, they have that ability. They will not hesitate for a second to take you out if they feel that you're in the way of what they want to achieve. And I think the other the other curious aspect about them is that there are, people might find this rather odd, but Dave Emery, who nobody can ever accuse of being pro-fascist or whatever. I mean, he's very left-wing. I myself would have difficulty being on the same political spectrum with him and such, but he points out that what this group has is what he calls the Borman organization, the remarkable Borman organization, is that they have what they call Borman Jews or Zionists, who are every bit as involved in the Nazi International, which seems so bizarre given what we're told, that Nazis hate Jews and vice versa and so on like that. And the only explanation for it, Judith, comes back to that whole adage, that old adage, that the love of money is the root of all evil. That, apparently Meyer Lansky, the Jewish gangster from America, attempted to buy his way into the Borman organization, according to Manning's book about Borman and his escape to Argentina and so on like that. And he was told in so many words, get lost, but they do have people of Jewish extraction who work within that organization, because that's where the money is. These people should not be considered in terms of the racial aspect.
Yeah,
These
exactly.
are Babylonians in terms of the financial aspect and such, and they're captured in that level. But it's fascinating.
Do you think the Borman Group is still operating these days?
Yes, it's into its third generation. It's the way dynasties work have always been that you get the inspirational first generation, and you could say that Hitler was that. Some people might look at Haushofer and people, the inspirationist types, towards what became Nazi ideology and so on. But if you take Hitler as the inspirational first generation, and they're a little bit like the entrepreneurs of a company. They can get a company going, so it's brilliant, but they just don't know how to run it in such a way that it's sustainable. And so they have to hire in, not bureaucrats, but they have to hire in professionals. And Martin Bormann was a professional Nazi. He wasn't an inspired Nazi. I don't think Martin Bormann gave a hoot whether your nose was, whether even skin color or anything along those lines or whatever. What counted to Martin Bormann? Are you able to make the system work as I've designed it? And so on, okay? So it's very much a controlled system that Martin Bormann creates, and it's backed by violence. It's backed by a certain extent people who are inspired by Hitler's concepts and so on, and are willing to do stuff to ensure that the organization is sound. But that's all they're good for as far as these professionals are concerned. All right. So Bormann represents the professional Nazi who takes the reins and understands that he can run you don't have to have a country. You can run a supranational organization, in various parts of the world and so on, and various organizations. What you require is money. Okay. After Bormann's death, which people speculate was 1967, I believe, that he came to an end. I think it was 1967. I need to be corrected. This is, of course, people who believe that he escaped Germany at the end of the Second World War, moved down to Argentina and various places and so on like that. And, they make TV shows, terrible shows, almost as bad as those Bigfoot shows where they go out into the woods looking for Bigfoot, let's go looking for Martin Bormann, and so on like that. And it's terrible stuff, because it's like all detective work, follow the money. All right. And so you don't even have to worry if Borman made it to 1967 or 1947 or whenever it was and such. You only have to be able to work out, did he create an institution that is still viable and existing and operating in the world today? And, this is what Farrell's work is so incredibly valuable for looking at. Dave Emery on his Spitfire podcast and so on like that, almost obsessively has covered this since the 1970s in terms of the connections between the Nazi International, the paperclip Nazis, as they call them, that were brought to America for the scientific side of things, the Bush family, and particularly elements within the Republican Party, elements within NASA that were all part of this Nazi International from various sorts of levels. I think there's no doubt that the Bush family were extremely, very much the Nazi International's arm in the United States, as far as that, as far as front organizations go. Avril Harriman is probably the people you need to look at most closely when that comes to it. But this Dave Emery and so on have almost obsessively been discussing how this influence of this organization has been there, and so you get to a situation where the paperclip Nazis, the Nazi International, as Farrell calls it, or the Borman organization, are all connected in certain ways through front mediatories in the Bush family and so on. By the time you get to your third generation, you're talking about, I would say that the way to look at this is your third generation are the people who have control over the oil industry, and that comes through IG Farben, the massive German company. I don't think there has ever been a bigger company than IG Farben in terms of. It took nearly 50 years to break it up as it was decreed after the Second World War. So BASF and loads of companies, all the pharmaceutical companies and so on like that. This is your third generation, the people behind the scenes and controlling those boards and directors and so on like that. And it's self-perpetuating in terms of the way that Martin Bormann set things up. And so those connected boards of directors and so on, start anywhere you like. Start with the Bushes and go looking into that. Start with the establishment of the CIA and its relation to the Gehlen organization in Germany. And the CIA at the end of the Second World War was the German Gehlen spy network and so on, with a few bureaucrats from America running things and so on. And it remained that way for at least 2 to 3 decades. So it's an illusion to believe that the Borman organization doesn't exist if you think of it in terms of the establishment of the CIA, the establishment of the major pharmaceutical companies and the oil companies in relation to the financing that these groups received through. And to really confuse people out, you've got to also look at the Rockefeller connection with Standard Oil and these people. So Nazi International is what a lot of people would call big business, big pharma, big this side of things. And poor old Dave Emery is convinced that they will win in the end, that our world is destined to be made in the image of Martin Bormann's dream of a resuscitated, not a Reich. But Martin Bormann, I don't think, gave a hoot about German Reichs. What he gave for Martin Bormann, it was just control over money. Their conflict has always been with the central banking guys, the Rothschild faction, and so on. And
And another oddity in the cabinet of Mr. Hitler was Hjalmar Schacht.
Mm.
You know, yeah, was he the financial minister?
Yes,
Yes.
he's the most important guy to study along these lines. Look at what he's doing. It's almost like when you say, "Yeah, Martin Bormann," it's a myth that he survived. All right. Well, if he didn't survive, Schacht was doing everything that Bormann planned to have been done, and really, it's you can connect into the Bank of International Settlements, in Basel in Switzerland, and so on. But Schacht was the guy who effectively put into motion the European Central Bank. And whether anybody likes it or not, the European Central Bank is a German-controlled institution.
Yeah, sure.
There's, and it's really the only European institution that Germany is really interested in terms of the people who are sort of at the top. And that, it's almost like they're ambivalent. You want to go and save the world with your, climate crisis and population control and so on, go for it because it helps the narrative and so on like that. But the important thing has always been who controls the money. And Schacht was the guy who, if Martin Bormann didn't survive, he just followed Bormann's playbook. So Schacht is, Schacht is Martin Bormann in action.
Yeah.
If you understand what I mean. That's my impression.
And he was a Jew, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Operating at the height of Nazi Germany,
Yeah, that is so weird.
Yeah, because the Zionists themselves had an element where the Second World War was of benefit to them in terms that world Jewry decided to make a move back to the Palestinian state, into Palestine, and all the horrors that were brought about by the Second World War convinced many Jews to pack up and try their luck down there. So people would be outraged to say that they were happy that it happened. I don't think that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that never let a crisis go to waste is an old saying, and I think they benefited from that big time. But I think a lot of people would be very shocked again at the highest levels. It's almost like what I'm saying about bankers, American, British, German, talking at the when we're all sending our men to kill each other in the trenches of World War One, and then they're all having tea and biscuits and discussing what they're going to do after all the carnage together, and they're all mates and collegial in their behavior towards each other. There are Jewish interests that are the same mentality. All right, it was described to me by a Lebanese guy who was very well versed in Jewish culture. He said that the Jews have this in their own culture. They know the difference between the big Jew and the little Jew. And the big Jew is always doing stuff that gets a little Jew into trouble. And in this case, you would have had Jewish people of the Zionist bent that would have been operating at the same levels as Schacht, as these bankers and so on along those lines, and would have been above the squalor of what was happening to the little Jew in the ghettos of Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Elitists, I think I'm the one saying. Yeah, they have them too.
So now today I read the Edinburgh Times, and they came out with a timetable for blackouts in the UK with precise
I didn't know.
with precise times. Where and when you can expect to be taken off the grid for 3 hours.
3 hours.
Yeah, and Switzerland has a little bit of a different model. They go for 4 hours power, 4 hours not, and so on.
Yeah.
How they will manage to, run even an office with these, I don't know. I have no
Yeah.
idea. So how do you see that in the UK? Is there awareness that the shit might hit the fan?
Yeah. You know, it was a question I was going to ask you about,
Yeah,
you
you
know,
can do that
protests,
afterwards.
yeah. You know, there's the protests that we're seeing in Europe with the cost of living crisis, as they're liking to, trying to call it. And it's not a crisis, it's a planned event,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. But here in Britain, we've had protests where people are burning their power bills,
Power
things
bills.
like that. Yeah. And it is not covered by the mainstream media. The BBC will not cover this kind of stuff. They won't cover what's happening in Europe. So anything that is outside of the narrative of the powers that be, I don't think even by the standards of the last few years, it's becoming quite incredible. I mean, look what's happening in France. And I have not seen a single news item in our mainstream media that goes into in-depth of what's going on amongst the French. But it's the same amongst our own people, in terms of our own media covering things, and they demonstrably, they misrepresent what the anger really is, and they try to play it in the left wing, right wing, paradigms that everybody seems to be comfortable with, who hasn't looked into things behind the scenes. And people are definitely moving. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the media will not report that many people are aware that this is planned, that this didn't need to happen, that this is a self-owned crisis that could easily have been avoided, and don't tell me it's Putin's fault.
Yeah.
This is what is misrepresented in the media overall. That this anger is that we know what you're doing. We know that this didn't need to happen, but here we are. You're going to put it on us, and so on. And I think the British don't have a history. The French will riot at the drop of a hat. The Germans have the history that they've had of the chaos in the 1920s between rival factions and things like that. Britain has never really had street chaos in the way that Europe has suffered it. Various countries, whether it's Spain, Italy, Germany, France, Poland, whatever, they've never really had that. And there is a thinking that it might actually happen this time, where people just have a gutsful and decide to take matters into their own hands, as far as this goes. Now, I don't know how much is going to play into the hands of the powers that be. I don't know what level of control they have, and so on. As far as I'm concerned, their biggest thing at the moment is they're desperate to start a world war with Russia. That's their one out. In their thinking, we can reestablish ourselves, reboot the financial system, make it more controlling over everybody, and that's great. Well, we need a war to do that. So that's the precipice I think we're all in at the moment. I think the British people, along with much of the people in Europe, realize that this is the path we're being led down, and it didn't need to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So what question did you want to ask?
Well, it was that I've seen footage of protests in Germany that are enormous, and so on. I'm just wondering if that has hit sort of street level or awareness or something. Is it being covered at a local level? I'm sure your media doesn't, but
Yeah, in the general media, yeah, there is no coverage really about it. Yeah, once in a while, maybe a few sentences, but that's basically it. So what is going on here is a little bit similar to the times of the COVID nonsense. Then after a while in Germany, in all cities, people started protesting, and every Monday. And that is happening here right now as well. And sometimes, yeah, and also depending if you live in a larger city or not, sometimes a couple of thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. But yeah, the media is keeping it under wraps. Yeah, but still you can find it on YouTube or somewhere else. And I think what is going on here is, yeah, Germany is being wound up. Yeah.
Being what?
Yeah, it's done. You know, it's the last leftovers are being wound up. So
Right.
I mean, okay, China now is coming in here big. Yeah, they have bought 1/3 of the port in Hamburg, and
Really? Yeah.
there are other Chinese interests as well. And another thing, those bigger companies, let's say corporations, yeah, that can afford it, they are all going to the United States now. Yeah, so the industry will be gone. So the United States will have a better employment. Yeah, and Europe is being deindustrialized.
So it's been gutted basically
Yeah,
in terms of
yeah,
its
exactly.
infrastructure and so on.
Yeah,
All right.
and that is one of the things that the United States always wanted. Under no circumstances can there be a cooperation between Germany and Russia, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
that would strengthen Europe. And yeah, as we
Yeah.
know, the
Keep the
United States.
Russians out and keep the Germans down. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And United States doesn't like a lot of competition. They like to control everything.
Yeah, for sure.
And unfortunately, our stupid politicians, yeah, um, they go along. They operate like contract killers for the economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so going back to those protests that you are seeing, I guess, what I've seen is that people who would be normally categorized as being left wing and others who are right wing, but they're sort of thinking themselves, the people that are usually thrown against each other. It's almost like they've all realized that at the end of the day, the famous saying, it's the economy, stupid. We're, yeah, at the end of the day, there's nothing that quite unites the people like being hit in the pocket, in terms of, especially if it's being done overtly against one's interests, in terms of being able to feed your own family and so on like that. I think we tend to chuck our political views, take a back seat to our economic hardships. In terms of ordinary, normal people, all right, that, yeah, okay, you can have a debate over the dinner table as to, which politician or whatever. It's no different than saying which football team's better than the other and such. But when it actually comes to what is put on that table to eat, that's the defining issue that I think brings a lot of people together. And inflation, I don't know, inflation must be going crazy in Germany.
Yeah, they tell us it's 10%, but they're in this, in that basket that they are describing, there are, laptops in it, there are surfboards in it, and just items that you really do not buy on a regular basis. That is also in the basket that they are describing, but by putting in all those items, yeah, that are really not being bought constantly, yeah, doing it that way, you can, or opera visits and stuff like this. That is all in this basket where they afterwards tell you, yeah, it's 10% inflation.
Yeah.
But if you go,
we do it the old
strictly
way.
by supermarkets, energy, and so forth,
Yeah.
I would say the inflation is around 30 to 40%.
Yeah. And it's a manipulation that they can't hide at the end of the day. When somebody does their weekly shop, they know what, 100 euros bought last month compared to what it's buying now. Same here in the UK. You just can't hide that. You can manipulate it and say, oh, inflation was this and that. Somebody was saying in the United States that if they measured inflation the way they used to measure it in the 1960s, the United States would be 17 to 18% inflation at this particular point in time. And they've, they have, again, in terms of my own book, in terms of the overall macro picture of where we're all going, to me, it has always boiled down to, if you have a society of unequal weights and measures, where one measure is applied to one group of people and a different measure to other people, and justice that way through weights and measures. As soon as you start doing that, you're going to have a disaster of a society within 120 years, no matter how well it starts off. And of course, I bang on all the time about this. The worst false measure on this planet is debt-based currency. If you issue currency as a debt on a nation, you've created an unequal measure. As long as you're able to say, okay, if you can't pay back with the 10%, and nobody can ever pay that 10% because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm going to take all your stuff. You didn't pay back the 10%. Well, how could I? Where is the money? This is the con job. It's as simple as that. It might be confused with, banking and accounting tricks and all this kind of stuff and rollovers and things like that. But that is essentially what national debt is, and why it destroys every society where the currency, the money is a debt on the people that they cannot pay, pay.
I usually, if people can't understand that, I usually use this example. Imagine there is a small island and 10 people are living on that island, and their money is a stick. So, and everybody of those 10 has a stick.
Yeah.
So now one day somebody needs a second stick. Yeah. Okay. And somebody gives him his stick, but he says, because I did that, you have to give me back 2.
Yeah.
It's not just the stick that I gave you. That means, because a new stick is not created, that means somebody has to lose everything. There is no way around. That's right.
Somebody is always going to lose.
Yeah.
And that's what that's essentially what every conflict in society is based upon. Things like racism, classism, all of this sort of stuff. These are just simply symptoms of the disease of interest-bearing money. It's you get a financial system that people can trust and is not a debt on them at the beginning. And I guarantee you that there would be such a decrease in crime, issues like racism, hatred, that kind of stuff. It's because we're all fighting over that last, that last stick. Yeah, to make sure we're not the one who goes down the tubes at the end of the day. It's why certain elements in society, groups, ethnic groups, get hit harder than others. Yeah. They're further away from getting that stick than everybody else. But under a fair system, this wouldn't be the case. But as I say, I'm hoping that is there's a fundamental element in the world that we're living in at the moment that will change my hope is before 2030, by 2035, and I honestly believe that we will see the hope of it coming right by 2024, by the end of 2024, going into 2025. There's still a lot of work and a lot of screaming and yelling to carry on, and we've got to stop these guys trying to blow us up with nuclear weapons, because they want the old system still and so on. But I actually think there are enough sane people behind the scenes in ways that people are not able to detect unless they've learned to look for dynamics that are not discussed in mainstream media or in academia and so on. And, you know, with that as a teaser, I'd say you saw what happened in China a few days ago. The guy who got pulled out of the... All right. You know, China itself, it's having a deep state, what I would call a Satan death cult problem within its own society. And there's a battle going on there. I think the people who are most ahead of the curve, and people are going to scream blue murder over this, and that's the Russians. You know, when Putin was pulling oligarchs off airplanes, and everybody saying how evil he was and so on, he was pulling those criminals off airplanes with SWAT teams, you know, in the early 2000s, late 1990s and so on. There's no Khodorkovsky, these kind of guys.
I know.
Where did they all run to? They all ran to London. You know, they all got themselves, they took their wealth from Russia and so on, but Russia was cleansed of them. And I think they're ahead of most people in terms of that. But my hope is that that we will see that their system has actually failed. All we're witnessing at the moment is the screaming, and a lot of people are going to get hurt as a result. But you know,
yeah, okay. So that was our first hour already, believe it or not. And yeah, so we are going to take a short break, and then we are going to dive into the Silver Age and to see where the nightmare began, where it has its roots. So until next time, bye-bye, and we see the patrons on the other side.
Silver Age, getting the money.